Your soulmate has something to say but can't find the words. Do this now. Stay here with me for a moment, don't scroll, don't rush, because this message is arriving at a very specific time for a reason. Your soulmate is carrying words inside them right now, words that have weight, words that matter, but every time they try to bring them to the surface, something stops them. It's not that they don't know what they feel. It's that they don't know how to say it without risking everything they're afraid of losing. Listen carefully, because silence doesn't always mean absence of feeling. Sometimes silence is the loudest sign that something important is trapped inside. Your soulmate has been rehearsing conversations in their head, starting sentences and stopping halfway, imagining outcomes that scare them into stillness. The words are there. The courage is what keeps slipping away. Stay with me, because what they're struggling with isn't indifference, it's fear layered with care. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of opening something they won't know how to close. Fear of admitting how deeply something has affected them when they've worked so hard to appear composed. They don't want to sound weak. They don't want to sound late. And they don't want to risk hearing something they're not ready to face. Listen closely now, because your soulmate feels the pressure of unspoken truth in their body. It shows up as restlessness. As distraction that doesn't work. As moments where they almost reach out and then pull back. That tension is exhausting. Carrying words you don't express drains you in ways you don't immediately recognize. Stay right here, because they've been telling themselves stories to cope. Stories like, now isn't the right time, or, it's probably better left unsaid, or, if it mattered, it would be obvious already. But deep down, they know those stories are shields. Shields against vulnerability. Shields against change. Listen carefully, because the truth they're holding isn't small. It's not casual. It's not something that can be slipped into a light conversation. It has emotional consequences. And when something carries consequences, people hesitate. Even when staying silent hurts more. Stay with me, because part of what's stopping them is not knowing how you'll receive the words. They don't know if you're open, guarded, tired, or already moved on emotionally. Uncertainty freezes people. Especially people who care more than they admit. Listen closely now, because this is where you matter more than you realize. Not by forcing them to speak. Not by demanding clarity. But by creating safety. Safety doesn't come from pressure. It comes from permission. Stay right here, because permission can be silent, but it can't be absent. Right now, your soulmate doesn't need you to fix anything. They need a signal that honesty won't be punished. That whatever they say won't immediately be turned into a verdict. Listen carefully, because what keeps people quiet isn't always fear of rejection, it's fear of being misunderstood. Fear that their words will be taken the wrong way. Fear that their intention won't translate. Fear that they'll be reduced to a moment instead of understood as a whole. Stay with me, because the weight of this unsaid truth is affecting how they show up. You might feel them slightly distant, or hesitant, or inconsistent. That's not lack of care. That's someone standing on the edge of vulnerability without knowing where to land. Listen closely now, because the longer words stay trapped, the heavier they become. What could have been said simply begins to feel complicated. What could have been shared gently starts to feel overwhelming. This is why timing matters, not for perfection, but for release. Stay right here, because do this now doesn't mean push them. It means soften the space between you. It means lowering the emotional volume so truth can be heard. Sometimes people can only speak when they don't feel interrogated by expectation. Listen carefully, because one of the most powerful things you can do right now is signal openness without demand. A calm presence. A genuine check-in. A moment that says, I'm here to listen, not to judge. That kind of energy invites honesty more than any direct question ever could. Stay with me, because your soulmate is watching closely, even if it doesn't look like it. They're reading tone, timing, subtle cues. They're asking themselves, is it safe now? And safety isn't about certainty, it's about emotional room. Listen closely now, because emotional room means letting silence breathe instead of filling it with assumptions. It means allowing conversations to unfold instead of steering them. It means not rushing to interpret before understanding. Stay right here, because the words they're holding may not come out perfectly. They may stumble. They may circle the point before reaching it. They may say less than they mean. That doesn't mean the truth isn't there. It means they're learning how to let it out. Listen carefully, because when someone struggles to find words, they're often fighting old habits. Habits of staying quiet. Habits of minimizing. Habits formed when expressing emotion wasn't welcomed in the past. Breaking those habits takes time and gentleness. Stay with me, because if you react too quickly, defensively, dismissively, or with intensity, it can shut the door they're trying to open. But if you respond with steadiness, you give their courage somewhere to land. Listen closely now, because this moment isn't about winning clarity. It's about allowing expression. There's a difference. Clarity demands answers. Expression allows truth to emerge gradually. Stay right here, because even if they don't speak today, what you do now still matters. The energy you hold. The patience you show. The way you make space without disappearing. All of that registers. Listen carefully, because doing nothing at all, emotionally disengaging, pulling away completely, can reinforce their fear that it's too late to speak. Presence doesn't mean pursuit. It means availability without pressure. Stay with me, because availability is rare. And people open up to what feels rare and safe at the same time. Listen closely now, because the truth they want to say isn't about control. It's about honesty. It's about naming something they've carried quietly. And naming something is often the first step toward change, whatever direction that change takes. Stay right here, because you don't need to script this moment. You don't need to prepare the perfect response. You only need to stay grounded, open, and real. Human presence invites human truth. Listen carefully, because when the words finally come, whether today or soon, they won't arrive dramatically. They'll arrive softly. And softness is easy to miss if you're bracing for impact. Stay with me, because softness is where healing begins. Not resolution. Not guarantees. Just honesty finally finding air. Listen closely now, because if you feel called to act, act gently. If you feel called to wait, wait consciously. Don't disappear. Don't harden. Don't force. Stay right here, because this is a threshold moment. One where silence can either deepen or dissolve, depending on how safe truth feels. Breathe. Your soulmate isn't quiet because they don't care. They're quiet because they care enough to be afraid. What you do now can turn fear into courage. Not by pushing, but by making space. Stay here. Listen. And let the words find their way. Stay with me a little longer, because this part is about what happens after you make space, when silence starts to shift and something fragile begins to move. When your soulmate feels even a hint of safety, their inner world changes. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But enough that the words they've been holding stop pressing inward and start leaning toward the surface. Listen carefully, because the first thing that changes isn't speech, it's breath. They breathe a little deeper. Their shoulders drop a fraction. The tightness in their chest loosens just enough for them to think clearly instead of defensively. This is how truth prepares to emerge, not with certainty, but with relief. Stay right here, because they're still afraid. Afraid that once the words leave their mouth, they won't be able to control how they land. Afraid that honesty will shift the ground beneath both of you. Afraid that naming what they feel will force a decision they've been avoiding. Fear doesn't vanish when safety appears, it becomes quieter, more manageable. Listen closely now, because your soulmate is sorting through their feelings with new eyes. They're separating what's real from what's protective. They're realizing that some of their silence wasn't about timing at all. It was about not knowing how to be vulnerable without losing power or dignity. That realization is humbling. Stay with me, because humility opens doors pride keeps locked. When someone stops trying to appear unaffected, they start telling the truth to themselves. They admit they've missed you. They admit they've been confused. They admit they didn't know how to say what mattered without sounding exposed. These admissions don't need an audience yet, but they change everything internally. Listen carefully, because this internal shift makes them more attentive to you. Not in an obvious way. In subtle ways. They notice your tone more. Your pauses. The spaces between your words. They're listening not just for content, but for permission. Stay right here, because permission isn't a green light, it's an atmosphere. It's how you respond when things aren't clear. It's how you handle silence without filling it. It's how you stay present without pushing for answers. That atmosphere is what allows truth to move from thought to voice. Listen closely now, because your soulmate is also wrestling with regret. Regret for the times they almost spoke. Regret for choosing composure over connection. Regret for underestimating how heavy unsaid words become over time. Regret doesn't always look like apology. It often looks like hesitation before courage. Stay with me, because courage doesn't roar. It inches forward. It tests the ground. It asks, is this safe enough now? And when it feels even a little safety, it tries again. Listen carefully, because when the words finally start forming, they may not sound like a confession. They may sound ordinary. Incomplete. Slightly awkward. That's normal. When someone hasn't practiced speaking from the heart, the first attempts are clumsy. Clumsiness is not dishonesty, it's learning. Stay right here, because the most important thing you can do when the words begin is not interrupt the process. Don't correct the phrasing. Don't rush to conclusions. Don't fill the gaps. Let them find their way. Silence, used gently, becomes a bridge instead of a wall. Listen closely now, because they might circle the truth before naming it. They might talk around it. They might start with something safer. This is not avoidance, it's approach. Like stepping into cold water slowly instead of jumping in. Respect that pace. Stay with me, because respect builds trust. And trust is what allows deeper honesty to follow. When someone feels heard without being judged, they dare to go further. They risk saying the thing they were most afraid to say. Listen carefully, because the thing they want to say may not be what you expect. It might not be a declaration or a decision. It might be an admission of confusion. Of fear. Of caring more than they allowed themselves to show. Truth doesn't always arrive neatly wrapped. Stay right here, because your response matters, but not in the way people usually think. You don't need to solve anything. You don't need to reassure immediately. You don't need to decide the future on the spot. You need to receive what's offered with steadiness. Listen closely now, because receiving doesn't mean agreeing. It means acknowledging. It means letting their truth exist without turning it into a verdict. That distinction is crucial. People shut down when they feel their honesty is being judged as right or wrong instead of understood. Stay with me, because understanding is what heals the tension words create. When someone feels understood, they don't need to defend themselves. Defense is what silences people again. Listen carefully, because your soulmate has been silent for so long, partly because they didn't trust that understanding would follow honesty. Show them, through calm presence, that it can. Stay right here, because you might feel your own emotions rising now. Relief. Sadness. Anger. Hope. Let them rise without letting them take over. Your steadiness is the anchor in this moment. Listen closely now, because even if the conversation doesn't resolve everything, something essential has already happened. Truth has moved. And once truth moves, it doesn't go back into hiding. Stay with me, because this movement changes the emotional landscape. It reduces pressure. It brings clarity, even if it's partial. It replaces imagined fears with real information. Real information, even when difficult, is easier to live with than endless guessing. Listen carefully, because your soulmate may need time after speaking. Time to integrate. Time to process the fact that they finally said what they'd been carrying. Give them that time without withdrawing your presence. Presence without pressure is powerful. Stay right here, because you're learning something too. You're learning that you don't need to chase words. You need to create space for them. You don't need to control outcomes. You need to stay aligned with yourself. Listen closely now, because alignment feels like calm even in uncertainty. It feels like knowing you showed up honestly, regardless of what happens next. That calm is earned. Stay with me, because if the words don't come yet, this still isn't wasted. Safety accumulates. Trust builds layer by layer. And every moment you choose openness over assumption makes the eventual truth easier to speak. Listen carefully, because the silence you're holding now is different from the silence before. This silence isn't avoidance, it's preparation. And preparation matters. Stay right here, because when someone finally speaks from a place of fear turned into courage, it's a sacred moment. Not because it guarantees a future, but because it honors reality. Listen closely now, because reality is kinder than fantasy in the long run. Fantasy keeps people quiet. Reality invites growth. Stay with me, because you don't need to rush this chapter to its end. Let it unfold. Let words arrive when they're ready. Let presence do its work. Breathe. You've done what needed to be done, you made space without losing yourself. You chose openness without pressure. You invited truth without demanding it. That choice, steady, patient, human, is what allows words to finally find their way out. Stay with me, because this part is where things stop being about silence and start being about courage that's still learning how to walk. After space has been created, after the pressure has softened, after your soulmate has felt that it might finally be safe to be real, something subtle but powerful happens inside them. The words don't rush out all at once. Instead, they begin rearranging themselves. Slowly. Carefully. Like they're testing whether the truth can stand on its own without collapsing everything around it. Listen carefully, because your soulmate is no longer asking, "Do I have something to say?" They know they do. The question has shifted to, "Can I live with myself if I don't say it?" That shift is heavy. It doesn't come with excitement. It comes with responsibility. Responsibility to their own emotions. Responsibility to you. Responsibility to the moment they've been postponing. Stay right here, because postponement has a cost they're finally feeling clearly. Every time they chose silence, it felt like relief in the moment, but now they see the accumulation. The distance that grew. The tension that lingered. The sense of something unfinished that never fully went away. Avoidance always charges interest, and now the bill has arrived. Listen closely now, because they're also confronting an uncomfortable truth about themselves. That they've been good at managing impressions, but not always good at expressing needs. That they know how to stay composed, but not always how to stay emotionally present. This realization isn't cruel, it's clarifying. It shows them where growth is required. Stay with me, because growth feels awkward at first. It doesn't look confident. It looks hesitant. Your soulmate may rehearse what they want to say multiple times, only to scrap it and start again. They're trying to find words that are honest without being overwhelming, vulnerable without sounding weak, clear without being final. That balance is difficult, especially for someone who hasn't practiced it. Listen carefully, because part of their struggle is letting go of control. Once words are spoken, they can't be taken back. Once truth is shared, it belongs to both of you. Control dissolves in honesty, and that loss of control is frightening for someone who learned to stay safe by staying contained. Stay right here, because they're also thinking about you more deeply now. Not just how you might respond, but how you've been responding all along. They're noticing how patient you've been. How you didn't force conversations. How you allowed silence without punishing them for it. That awareness brings both gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for your grace. guilt for the weight that grace required you to carry alone. Listen closely now, because guilt doesn't paralyze them the way it once did. It motivates reflection. It makes them want to be fair, not just comfortable. And fairness requires honesty, even when it's inconvenient. Stay with me, because honesty doesn't always arrive as a single moment. Sometimes it arrives in stages. A partial truth. A small admission. A sentence that opens the door without walking fully through it yet. That doesn't mean they're holding back intentionally. It means they're learning how to stand in vulnerability without collapsing. Listen carefully, because when the words begin, they may surprise you. They may not be dramatic or poetic. They may sound simple, even understated. Something like, "I've been wanting to say something for a while," or "I didn't know how to bring this up." Those sentences carry more weight than they appear to, because they represent fear being challenged. Stay right here, because what matters most in that moment isn't what they say, it's how you listen. Listening without rushing. Listening without preparing a response. Listening without turning their honesty into a test they have to pass. That kind of listening is rare, and it makes all the difference. Listen closely now, because your soulmate is extremely sensitive in this phase. Not fragile, but exposed. Their defenses are lowered, and when defenses are lowered, reactions are felt more intensely. A calm response reassures. A sharp response reinforces fear. This doesn't mean you have to hide your truth, it means you deliver it with care. Stay with me, because care doesn't mean self-silencing. It means choosing timing and tone wisely. It means allowing the conversation to unfold instead of trying to control its direction. When both people are present instead of reactive, honesty deepens instead of shutting down. Listen carefully, because even if they say what they've been holding, it may not resolve everything immediately. Truth creates clarity, but clarity doesn't always create closure on the spot. Sometimes it creates new questions, new boundaries, new understanding. That's normal. Stay right here, because your soulmate may need reassurance, not reassurance that everything will be okay, but reassurance that they're allowed to be honest without being abandoned. That reassurance doesn't come from promises. It comes from presence. Listen closely now, because presence says, "I'm here with you in this moment, even if I don't have answers yet." That message is powerful. It tells their nervous system that vulnerability doesn't equal danger. Stay with me, because something else is happening too. As they speak, you're learning how it feels to receive honesty without losing yourself. You're noticing whether their words come with accountability or avoidance. Whether they name their part or soften it too much. This information matters, and you're finally in a place where you can see it clearly. Listen carefully, because you're no longer desperate for words. You're discerning. You're listening not just for content, but for energy. For sincerity. For follow-through. And that discernment protects you. Stay right here, because discernment doesn't close the heart, it steadies it. It allows you to stay open without being naive. And that balance is what healthy connection requires. Listen closely now, because even if they struggle to say everything at once, the fact that they're trying matters. Effort doesn't erase the past, but it signals potential. Whether that potential becomes reality depends on consistency, not just courage. Stay with me, because consistency is the quiet work that follows honest words. It's how someone shows that what they said wasn't just a release, it was a commitment to change. You don't need to demand it. You'll feel it if it's there. Listen carefully, because if consistency doesn't follow, that's clarity too. And clarity, even when disappointing, is kinder than confusion. Stay right here, because you're also learning to trust yourself in this process. You trust yourself to listen, to respond, to walk away if needed, to stay if it feels right. That trust didn't exist before. It does now. Listen closely now, because that trust changes the power dynamic. You're no longer waiting for words to give you worth or direction. You're receiving them as information, not validation. Stay with me, because this chapter isn't about guarantees. It's about integrity, on both sides. Integrity means showing up honestly, even when outcomes are uncertain. Listen carefully, because if the words still don't come yet, don't panic. Safety takes time to register fully. People don't unlearn silence overnight. What matters is that the environment has changed. The door is open. Stay right here, because an open door doesn't demand someone walk through immediately. It simply makes it possible. Listen closely now, because the most important thing you've done is this: you chose openness without self-erasure. You created space without abandoning your own needs. That's not easy. That's growth. Stay with me, because whatever happens next, whether words arrive today, tomorrow, or not at all, you will meet it grounded, not grasping. Calm, not desperate. Honest, not hidden. Breathe. This part of the story isn't about the perfect sentence finally being spoken. It's about fear loosening its grip and truth learning how to breathe. And that process, slow, imperfect, deeply human, is already underway. Stay with me, because this part is where courage stops being theoretical and starts becoming a choice that has weight. After the inner struggle, after the rehearsed sentences, after the quiet permission you've created, your soulmate reaches a point where silence itself begins to feel dishonest. Not dramatic, not explosive, just wrong. And when silence starts to feel wrong, words don't feel optional anymore. They feel necessary. Listen carefully, because this is not the moment where everything suddenly becomes clear for them. It's the moment where they accept that clarity will only come after they speak, not before. For a long time, they believed they needed certainty before honesty. Now they're realizing honesty is what creates certainty. That realization is unsettling, but it's also freeing. Stay right here, because fear hasn't disappeared. It's still there, sitting quietly beside them. But it's no longer in control. Instead of fear saying, "Don't say anything," it's now saying, "Be careful." And that shift matters. Fear is no longer stopping action, it's simply asking for gentleness. Listen closely now, because your soulmate is starting to imagine what life looks like if they never say the words. They imagine years passing with this truth still lodged inside them. They imagine the regret of wondering what might have happened if they had been braver. That imagined future hurts more than the risk of speaking. And that's when courage finally outweighs fear. Stay with me, because this doesn't mean they suddenly become eloquent or confident. It means they're willing to be awkward. Willing to stumble. Willing to say something imperfect instead of nothing at all. That willingness is the real breakthrough. Listen carefully, because when someone who has stayed quiet for a long time decides to speak, they don't start with grand declarations. They start with honesty about their struggle. They might say they didn't know how to bring this up. That they were afraid. That they've been thinking about it longer than they let on. Those admissions are not excuses, they're context. Stay right here, because context matters. It helps you understand the silence without excusing the impact. It allows you to hear their truth while still honoring your own experience. Both can exist at the same time. Listen closely now, because your soulmate is watching you closely in this phase, not to judge, but to learn. They're learning whether honesty leads to understanding or withdrawal. Whether vulnerability leads to connection or collapse. Your response teaches them something important, even if you don't realize it. Stay with me, because responding doesn't mean fixing. It means staying present. It means allowing the moment to be what it is without rushing it toward resolution. When someone finally speaks, they need space for the words to land before they're analyzed. Listen carefully, because this is where patience becomes active instead of passive. Active patience listens, reflects, and asks gentle clarifying questions if needed. Passive patience swallows feelings again. You're not here to swallow, you're here to engage with awareness. Stay right here, because as the conversation unfolds, you may notice something surprising. You're calmer than you expected. Not because you don't care, but because you've already done a lot of emotional work on your own. You're not clinging to the words for validation. You're receiving them as information. Listen closely now, because that calm changes everything. It shifts the dynamic from desperation to dialogue. From fear to mutual presence. And people speak more honestly when they're not being emotionally pulled in any direction. Stay with me, because your soulmate is also feeling that calm. They feel less pressure to perform. Less need to defend. Less urge to control the outcome. And in that space, deeper truth has room to surface. Listen carefully, because deeper truth often comes after the first layer. After the initial admission. After the relief of finally saying something. This is when they may say what they were most afraid to say, how much they care, how confused they've been, how deeply this connection affected them. Stay right here, because hearing that can stir a lot inside you. Relief. Sadness. Anger. Hope. Let those emotions move without letting them take over. You're allowed to feel without losing clarity. Listen closely now, because clarity is your anchor. You're listening not just for words, but for accountability. For ownership. For signs that this honesty isn't just a moment of release, but the beginning of a different way of showing up. Stay with me, because you're no longer impressed by emotion alone. You've learned that emotion without action fades. You're attentive to whether their words come with responsibility or just vulnerability. That awareness protects you. Listen carefully, because this is where boundaries may gently emerge. Not as ultimatums. Not as threats. But as truths about what you need moving forward. Boundaries spoken calmly invite respect instead of resistance. Stay right here, because speaking boundaries doesn't mean closing the door. It means defining the space so connection doesn't become confusion again. Clear space allows honesty to stay alive. Listen closely now, because your soulmate may not be ready to meet every boundary immediately. Growth takes time. What matters is whether they're willing to try, to listen, to stay present even when it's uncomfortable. Stay with me, because discomfort is no longer something either of you is running from. It's something you're learning to sit with together, or apart, if needed. That's maturity. Listen carefully, because this moment doesn't decide everything. It sets a tone. A new one. One where silence is no longer the default response to fear. One where words are allowed to exist even when they're messy. Stay right here, because even if the conversation pauses, something irreversible has happened. Truth has entered the space. And once truth is present, the relationship, whatever form it takes, can no longer function the same way. Listen closely now, because that's not a loss. It's a correction. A shift toward something more real, even if it's more challenging. Stay with me, because you're also learning to trust the process instead of forcing the outcome. You don't need to decide everything today. You only need to stay aligned with yourself while staying open to what's unfolding. Listen carefully, because alignment feels like peace even in uncertainty. It feels like knowing you didn't hide, didn't push, didn't abandon yourself. You showed up honestly. And that's enough. Stay right here, because whether this leads to rebuilding, redefining, or releasing, it will happen with more clarity than before. And clarity is a form of kindness. Listen closely now, because this chapter isn't about perfect communication. It's about brave communication. And brave communication always changes the story, even if it doesn't end the way we once imagined. Breathe. You created space. They found courage. Truth entered the room. Whatever happens next, it will be built on something real, not silence. And that, in itself, is a powerful ending to this part of the journey. Stay with me until the very last line, because this final part isn't about what they will say next, it's about what you now understand, and how that understanding quietly changes everything. After the courage, after the honesty, after the moment where words finally existed instead of being trapped, something settles. Not excitement. Not certainty. A calm recognition that whatever happens next, it will no longer be built on silence. Listen carefully, because you may notice that you feel different now. Not lighter in a dramatic way, but steadier. The tension you carried, the constant wondering, the interpreting, the waiting for something unspoken, has loosened its grip. You're no longer leaning forward emotionally, trying to anticipate what they might mean. You're standing where you are. Stay right here, because this is the shift most people miss. The shift from needing words to trusting yourself. From hoping honesty will arrive to knowing you can handle the truth whether it does or not. That confidence doesn't come from control, it comes from self-respect. Listen closely now, because your soulmate feels this change too. They sense that you're no longer frozen in uncertainty. That you're present, but not pleading. Open, but not empty. That shift alters how they relate to you, regardless of what direction things take. It removes the imbalance that silence created. Stay with me, because this is where outcomes stop being the focus. You're no longer asking, will this turn into something? You're asking, does this feel real? And that question is far more important. Real connection doesn't rush. It doesn't hide. It doesn't rely on guessing. Listen carefully, because you're also noticing something else now. You don't want words at any cost. You want words that are followed by alignment, by effort, by consistency. And you're no longer afraid to acknowledge that. Stay right here, because this doesn't make you demanding, it makes you honest. Wanting follow-through is not asking for too much. It's asking for reality instead of fantasy. Listen closely now, because if your soulmate continues to speak with openness, you'll receive it with clarity instead of intensity. You'll listen without losing your center. You'll respond without abandoning your needs. That's a powerful place to meet someone. Stay with me, because if they struggle again, if fear returns or words stall, you won't spiral. You'll see it for what it is, information. Not rejection. Not failure. Just a reflection of where they are. Listen carefully, because information gives you choice. And choice restores agency. You're no longer waiting for permission to decide how close you want to be. You're deciding based on what's actually happening. Stay right here, because this is where acceptance comes in. Not resignation, but grounded acceptance. Accepting that you can care without chasing. Accepting that you can listen without sacrificing yourself. Accepting that sometimes the bravest thing someone does still isn't enough for the future you need. Listen closely now, because this acceptance doesn't harden your heart. It softens it in a way that's sustainable. You're no longer bracing for disappointment, but you're also not clinging to hope blindly. You're present. Stay with me, because presence is what allows real connection to either deepen or end with dignity. There's no force here. No urgency. Just truth meeting truth. Listen carefully, because you're also releasing the belief that timing is something you must manage. You're letting go of the idea that if you just wait or say the right thing, everything will align. Alignment happens when both people choose it, not when one person holds the space indefinitely. Stay right here, because this realization doesn't make you bitter. It makes you peaceful. Peaceful enough to walk forward without dragging the past behind you. Listen closely now, because your soulmate may still be processing what honesty means for them. They may still be learning how to live outside silence. That journey belongs to them. You are no longer responsible for carrying it. Stay with me, because you've already done your part. You created space. You stayed human. You didn't shut down or push. You allowed truth to exist. That matters, regardless of what comes next. Listen carefully, because you're now in a place where love doesn't have to be loud to be real. But it does have to be mutual. And you're no longer afraid to name that internally. Stay right here, because naming things internally is how boundaries form naturally. Not as walls, but as clarity. Clarity about what you're available for and what you're not. Listen closely now, because if this connection continues, it will continue differently. Slower. More honest. Less imagined. If it ends, it will end with understanding instead of confusion. Both outcomes are cleaner than what came before. Stay with me, because clean endings or honest beginnings both require the same thing, courage paired with self-respect. You now have both. Listen carefully, because this final part isn't a conclusion, it's a completion. The chapter of silence has closed. The chapter of guessing has ended. What follows will be written with awareness. Stay right here, because you're stepping into a version of yourself that no longer waits quietly to be chosen. You participate. You discern. You stay open without disappearing. Listen closely now, because that version of you attracts different energy. Healthier energy. Energy that doesn't fear words. Energy that doesn't hide when things get real. Stay with me, because whatever love looks like next, for you or for them, it will be shaped by what you learned here. And what you learned is this: you don't need to chase truth. You need to be available for it. Listen carefully, because availability starts with yourself. With honoring your feelings. With trusting your perception. With choosing presence over fear. Stay right here, because this is the quiet ending that matters most. Not dramatic. Not final. Just real. Breathe. You held space without losing yourself. You welcomed honesty without demanding outcomes. You chose clarity over comfort. And that choice, more than any words ever spoken, has already changed the story.